Hi, I'm Jessica Bolton, and this is the Daily Mirror's Jess saying. Today, we're joined by a truly out of this world guest. It's the European Space Agency's Captain Samantha Cristoforetti. She is the first. Hello, Samantha. Thank you so much for joining
Hello,
us.
hello. Thanks for having me. How are you doing?
Very good, thank you. Very good indeed. It's a pleasure to speak to you. Obviously, our first guest who's actually been off the planet on here, so fantastic. Um, just just for people out there, you're now going to be in this new film, which is about the International Space Station, The Wonderful, which comes out now, and it's a fantastic film telling all the stories from up there, all different people appearing on it. And it's a pleasure to have you because not only were you a fighter pilot in the Italian Air Force, and before joining the European Space Agency, you then had the longest uninterrupted space flight by a European astronaut. You're the first female Italian astronaut, and until a couple of years ago, you had the longest uninterrupted space flight by a woman in totally. So what fantastic accomplishments to have. And you're going back up again next year. So can you tell me, I can't even fathom what it's like knowing you've been on the space station, you're going back there. How do you even begin to fathom this life that you have?
Well, first of all, obviously, I'm thrilled that I'm going back. It's been a while. I've been back since 2015, and all of these years, I've done amazing and interesting things with the European Space Agency, given my contribution to different space programs. But obviously, I really had this desire of going back and having this experience again. Which will be completely different, right? It's not going to be the first time. Maybe all that wonder and surprise and incredible excitement of the first time will not be there, and I do not expect it, but I expect something different. I expect to be calmer. I expect to be able to observe things better. I expect to live the experience a little bit in slow motion, because I will not, hopefully, or maybe, be so overwhelmed as I was the first time by that sheer emotion, and so I'm really looking forward to living this experience as a second time.
It must be a fantastic thing to be, looking forward to this. And for people out there that might not know, your first mission was Expedition 42, which you were thrilled about, weren't you?
Absolutely. Don't panic.
being a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy fan, I mean, it's the answer to Life at University, everything. It's, what a perfect one to go up on. But you were up there for 199 days and 16 hours, I believe.
Yeah, I say 200. That's my story. I'm sticking to it.
I was going to say, what does it feel like? You're like, could I not stay for the extra 8 hours?
Yeah, it was a long expedition, but I have to say I enjoyed every moment of it. And of course, there is routine, there is mundane things that you do on board. That's very much part of life up there. But that's what I enjoyed. It became life. It became like real life with, more difficult things, more mundane things, more routine things, the beauty, the just the sheer pleasure of living in weightlessness. But, it became a true extraterrestrial life. I had my space family up there. There was my crew, and, we got along fabulously. So we had the most amazing time. And so, I kind of call it my home away from home, right? I know I have this home up there, which is very special, very different. And finally, next year, I will have a chance to go back for a little while.
It's like having the poshest holiday home in the world or out of the world. To start at the beginning, I mean, you came from a small village in Italy, Mali, which you talked about on the show, and you obviously went up through the Air Force. You're a fighter pilot. You knew from a very young age, didn't you, that you wanted to do the astronaut route? Is that correct? And what inspired you?
It was definitely my dream since I was a child, and it's always difficult to put yourself back in your shoes as a child, right? Because, who knows what caught my fancy. I do not have that Apollo moment that some astronauts who are a little bit older have, right? They often say, I watched Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walk on the moon, and I knew I wanted to. So I did not have that. I think in my case, it was like a sedimentation of different impressions, a lot of different things from, science fiction readings, Star Trek on TV, wonderful teachers in elementary school who taught me about, astronomy and the stars and the solar system and the planets, an adventurous personality, and really this fortune of growing up in a little village where you can really live out that adventurous personality, because you're not, if you're a city dweller as a child, you're probably going to be supervised and accompanied everywhere. But back then in the 80s, at least, growing up in a little village in the Alps, you were out roaming all day, all summer break. You were just out there, living all those adventures in the woods around the river and so on. And so, probably developing also that adventurous personality, that self-confidence. And then growing up, but getting a little bit older in my teenager years, a lot of interest for science, for technology, but also for different cultures, different languages, this drive to go and live in different countries and places. And all of that kind of kept me on that path, for which not only being an astronaut remained like my ideal career, but I slowly also became a plausible candidate to become one.
And originally you think, well, coming from a little village, you'd be less likely to do it. But the way you say it, actually, that makes perfect sense, of that adventurous spirit and everything from a very young age. And you joined in the same recruitment classes are Captain Tim Peake, who we obviously you know very well, so from your time there. But the process of actually getting picked is a long one, isn't it? It's a long, arduous process. And is it correct that you only found out a couple of days before the press conference that where you were going to be announced as the next class of astronauts? So you actually got it. Yeah.
That was pretty crazy. I mean, as you say, the process had been very long, about a year. So we started in May 2008. And then fast forward 1 year, and I'm sitting there, and it's May 2009, and by now, we had started out with over 8,000 valid applications, and then by now, over this year, we've become less and less and less, and there was only like 10 of us left, 10 candidates. We kind of all either knew each other or somehow were in contact by that point, right? As we had gone through all the steps of the selection, we had built a little bit of a network. And so we knew we were keeping each other in the loop about, have you heard? No. How about you? No. So we kind of knew that nobody had heard. And the European Space Agency had announced, had put out like a call for media, please come on the 20th of May to Paris, and we will, introduce to you our new class of astronauts. And here we are on the 18th of May, the 2 days before, and I'm waiting all day. And by that point, my tension is unbelievable. I'm just, all this tension that has accumulated over this whole year. But then, knowing that we are so close, but then this release is not coming. Every year you go to bed and it's like, well, I guess I'll find out tomorrow. But then, the next day there's still no answer. And then two days before, towards the end of the day, I'm like, okay, I guess it was like 9 o'clock at night. I'm like, okay, I guess I will hear something tomorrow. And so I go and take a shower, and then I come back from my shower and I have a missed call.
Oh, no.
I'm like, oh no. It's like an unknown number, but from a French number. And of course I knew the headquarters of the European Space Agency are in Paris. And I'm like, I'm kind of like sitting on my bed, and my heart is pounding, and I'm wondering, what do I do? Do I call back? But you cannot call people back so late at night. That's what are they going to think? But then again, what if I don't call back? I'm like, and then an email comes in, and I open the email, and it's kind of really dry, and it says, if we would be really happy if you could join us in Paris on Wednesday morning. I'm like, well, let me check my schedule. I think I kept that free.
I was going to the hairdresser, so okay, I'll cancel. Yeah.
And then they just felt this sense. It wasn't even joy at the beginning. It was just the sheer sense of relief. All of that tension finally melted away.
You finally got it. You can finally look forward to it rather than it being over there. Can you sort of take us through the training? Now, you've brought out a brilliant book, A Diary of an Apprentice Astronaut. And it takes you through in brilliant detail about exactly what you have to do, because we all hear as sort of laymen, interested in space. We all hear about the sort of the centrifuge and everything like that, but it's so much that you have to do. Can you tell me about some of the hardest bits of the training?
So it's a little bit different for different people, right? There are some colleagues of mine, if you ask them about what the hardest thing was, they will tell you learning Russian, for example, which we had to do. But I already spoke Russian before I became an astronaut, so that bit for me was actually quite easy. I'd say for me, the hardest was the training for spacewalks. It's a training you do underwater. Every session is quite long, about 6 hours. And you work underwater in the same suit that you would use in space to actually do a spacewalk. So it's a pressure suit. It becomes, when you first get into it, it's kind of soft, but then they have to pressurize it so it can keep you alive. They kind of like blow it like a balloon, and then it becomes really hard, and you kind of have to work against this rigidity of the suit every time you're moving, every time you're like squeezing your hands to hold on to something or to attach a hook or to work. You're like, really have to work hard, like as though you were trying to like squeeze a tennis ball, except that you do it for like 6 hours. And so it's physically and mentally, I would say, demanding. And at the same time, you kind of have to, it's also a little bit of a question of your build as well. Being a smaller person like I am, unfortunately, does not help because the suit is quite big. And so you have to work a little bit harder than, a bigger person would.
Because you have to get the pressure of being able to do it. You need it's easier if you're bigger, I suppose. Yeah, to have a bit more.
It's also a question of fit of the suit. I mean, the suits were not, these suits that are still in use today, they were never really built for small people. And so you kind of have to fight your way through the training with a suit that's a little bit bigger than it would be ideal for you.
That's the last thing you need is that kind of extra thing to go against as well, isn't it? When you finally found out what mission or what expedition you were going on, what was that like when you finally heard, right, okay, I'm going and it's real now? What was that moment like?
It changes everything in a subtle way. It didn't change my life from one day to another because I was already in a training flow, and so I kind of smoothly went over from the training I was already doing to the assigned training. But then every day you subtly start to realize that actually everything is different because now you're actually part of a crew. And so there is this whole machinery that gets in motion to support you, not just as a generic astronaut in training, but as a crew member of that expedition, and so there is people who start to build your schedule, your training schedule, and it's not anymore a generic training schedule, but it's a training schedule that works towards an actual launch date. And you actually see the schedule, that's my launch date, that's what I'm working towards. And then there's people who are going to be responsible for your clothes and your food and all of that stuff, and they start to get in touch with you. And then there is your doctors and medical support people who are in charge of making sure you get all the medical examinations, and they start to get in touch with you. There are the people who are going to build your science complement that want to get your concurrence, for example, for experiments that you will be subject of. All that big machinery gets in motion, and you realize, okay, now I am on this path, and at the end of this long path, thanks to all those people who are helping out, at the end of this path there is a rocket waiting for me.
And that moment you're walking into the Soyuz rocket and you've got to get in there, and that it's counting down to launch. How did you sort of reconcile with that? Because we all know the risks of going into space. Is that in your mind? or have you blocked it out? And what was it like having to speak to your family before you left?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that you block the risk out, but you kind of have accepted it long before then, right? And so it's not like I think we dwell on risks while we're making a decision, right? Should I do this or not? What are the risks? What are the benefits? But as an astronaut, I mean, you've made that decision a long time ago, so that's just part of the deal. And honestly, I have to say it might be different next time, but at least that first time that I flew, the sheer happiness of being there, the excitement, the joy, that fulfillment, that sense of fulfillment of having finished all that training, and that sense of wonder and expectation as I was, starting this journey to space, they were so overwhelming in my mind, in my heart, that I think I just didn't have any space to worry about the risks at that point.
And I was reading that there was a number of sort of rituals as such, or good luck things that they do, because you launched off from Kazakhstan, and there was a number of things you had to do, wasn't there, before you went? Can you tell me about some of them? Because some of them seemed a little bit unusual.
It's indeed very ritualized. So I launched from Baikonur, from the cosmodrome of Baikonur in Kazakhstan, and that's obviously a place steeped in history. That's where Yuri Gagarin, Valentina Tereshkova, all those very famous pioneers of spaceflight, back then in the Soviet Union, they launched from there. And so you get there and you really have this feeling that you're like inserted, you're like part of this history, you're part of this continuous sequence of cosmonauts and astronauts that have been launching from there for over half a century now, and I think the rituals, they kind of help you feel that connection, and they kind of ground you and give meaning to your experience. So I really enjoyed it a lot. And it goes from, planting a tree a few days before launch. You plant a little tree along an alley, and the trees are there since Yuri Gagarin's, right? And that's already a very big tree. And then there's the smaller ones that have just been planted maybe a year ago or just a few months ago. But then, signing in the door of the place you've slept, or, doing one last toast before boarding the bus to the Cosmodrome with, this rock and roll song from the 80s. That's like this unofficial cosmonauts song in Russia, all the way to, peeing on the wheel of the bus taking you to the launch, which is typically something the guys do. It's a little bit difficult as a woman to participate. But then again, this one thing really drove home one point for me, which is traditions usually survive when they also have a practical purpose. Actually relieving yourself just before you get onto the rocket is not a bad idea. So I was kind of envious that they got to do that.
I the moment of blast off, can you tell me what that feels like when you're inside? What does that physically feel like? And with the extra G's that you're going to have.
Yeah. The moment of blast off itself is not as dramatic as people might think, because the acceleration initially is very small. So let's see, the Soyuz rocket fully fueled weighs about 300 tons, I believe, and the thrust is 500 tons. So it's not like you have a huge thrust compared to the weight of the rocket initially. And so it starts very smoothly, very slowly. But then what happens is that you're consuming that fuel, liquid oxygen and kerosene, at a humongous speed, very, very fast. And so your rocket becomes lighter and lighter and lighter very quickly. But the thrust, you're pushing, the engines are pushing the rocket with the same force. The rocket is becoming lighter and lighter. Well, the acceleration becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. And so as you progress, you start feeling those famous G's, so, which are just a product of this acceleration. And so you start feeling heavier and heavier and heavier. And at some point you get to about 4.3 Gs, I believe, in ascent, which means that you're like pressed in your seat with this force that is 4 over 4 times your own weight. It's like, as though you had like 4 of yourselves, like, on your chest, like pressing down on the seat, which makes it a little bit uncomfortable to breathe, but not too bad. And so, yeah, this is the major feeling. And then it's actually quite fast. The launch is about 8.5 minutes.
Right.
And then you go from that, you can call it hypergravity, so that, excessive weight that you feel, to weightlessness. The third stage shuts down and you're in space, you're in orbit, and then that's it. Then you're weightless. And that was the last time you were going to feel your weight for the next 6 months.
Which must be so weird. And that moment that you enter the space station, did it sort of blow your mind? How do you even, sort of approach that? I saw you coming through the hatch and you're like saying hello to your new flatmates, I suppose, for the next 200 days. How did you sort of get used to life up there? What was it like to first see it?
So, well, the moment of arrival was sheer joy. I mean, that was just pure happiness. And, I've seen those, the footage of that hatch opening a few times, and you can just see it on my face. I mean, I've got this gigantic smile, and it's just pure happiness just overflowing, right? Because, I've arrived, the launch has gone well, and we're there, and it's time to start this new life of the planet. But then, yes, absolutely, you're right. You kind of have to adjust. It's not immediate. I mean, you do not become a space station dweller in a day. It takes certainly, I would say, a couple of weeks. I was lucky that physically I adjusted quite easily. About half of the people are actually sick for some time, even for a few days. There is this kind of like motion sickness in a car. Some people are, subject to that. It's something similar. And so I was really lucky. I didn't have any of that. But still, you have to learn how to operate, how to move in weightlessness. This floating, you're going to float whether you like it or not. But in terms of actually being able to move around effectively, to do little actions like using the toilets, prepare your food, working. You have to deal with a lot of objects that are all floating around. So a very typical experience in the first few days or the first couple of weeks is to lose things, because you just don't have that reflex at the beginning of either, keep them in your eyes, in your side vision, if they're floating around, or actually securing them. That comes, within a couple of weeks, you learn that. And
always have something at hand that you can secure to the wall, or you're not going to see it again. Basically.
Yeah, typically at the beginning, the first thing that you learn is to secure everything. And then I think the more advanced skill that you learn maybe a couple of months down the line is, you let go of things. It's like having a third hand, right? I need my hands free to do something else, but I can't just let this thing go. But then your mind learns to keep that inside. You kind of see, oh, it's floating away. You just give it a push back, and it comes back into your field of vision. And you learn that. It becomes second nature.
And on some of the practicalities of it, because we hear the stats about the space station. It's the size of an American football field, and it has 6 bedrooms, I understand, and a gym. But it's, obviously it looks, when we see the pictures, it looks like you're obviously in sort of confined quarters. Was there ever a time you get claustrophobic up there, and is there a way to deal with that, a secret to deal with that?
Yeah, I perceived it as quite spacious, I have to say. Sometimes you see pictures of astronauts kind of sleeping, and that's in their little crew quarters, and those are pretty small. They're like maybe a phone booth for, those of you in the audience who remember those.
I think we did not one of them. Yeah.
Yeah. I did not perceive that as claustrophobic. I mean, if somebody is really claustrophobic, then it might be a problem. But but other than that, and then the space station itself is actually quite big. So that there's big modules, and most of the time, if you really wanted to have some space for yourself, you can probably find like a side module that is not being used in that moment, and
You get
spend time there if you want to, you need a moment for yourself.
And sleeping, you touched on that. How do you sleep? I want to talk about some of the sort of practicalities of life up there. How can you sleep in that weightless scenario?
So we use like sleeping bags. So there are no beds, right? I mean, a bed would not make sense because you cannot lie down. So we have these little cabins, and each one of us has a sleeping bag just to stay warm. And then in terms of how you sleep, it depends very much on the individual preferences. I just like to, when I felt myself going to sleep, I would just close my eyes, turn off the light, and sleep, just like floating in there like that. It didn't bother me if I would, maybe bump in the walls during the night a little bit. It didn't wake me up. Some other people, they really like to feel some kind of pressure that kind of mimics, the feeling of laying down in a bed. And so they will use like bungees to bungee themselves at the wall, so that the sponges kind of press them against the wall, and they kind of need that to go to sleep. Some people like tie their legs up against their chest because it's better for their back. It's very, very individual.
Very individual, and the obvious question of that. I know you could only take so many sort of clothes and personal items, which you had to pick. Like, was it about 6 months before you were flying? Like 6 months before you were going up there, you had to do a sort of selection of what clothes and stuff you were going to take. And I love the fact that you had to go and get your underwear from a normal shop because it doesn't come from like NASA or Russian things. It must be bonkers when you walk in somewhere and they say, "Can I help you?" "Yes, I need something for the space station." It's quite annoying. But the question that I'm sure everyone asks you is about the toilet facilities, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you because otherwise people will say, "Why didn't I?" As somebody that hates using toilets at festivals, even what are they like, and how long does it take to get used to?
So the toilet worked for me right off the bat. I mean, it was really nice. I was a little bit worried because you're right, and it's a very important piece of hardware. And if it doesn't work well for you, then you're gonna have a problem. But yeah, I was fortunate. I mean, it worked like a champ. It's a piece of hardware. It's actually Russian, a Russian design, and it's quite reliable. It has been used for a long time, both on the Russian segment and the non-Russian part of space station. And basically the idea is that you have to make sure that as stuff goes in the right direction and doesn't float away, right? You're not going to make any friends among your crewmates if you let stuff float away when you use the toilet. And so what we use to do that is airflow. So before you do anything, you have to turn on a fan, and that creates an airflow that draws both your urine and your solid waste in the right direction. The urine actually gets collected in a funnel, and it goes to a recycling system that turns it into potable water.
Oh,
and the solid waste gets collected in like bags that can get thrown in a container, and when that's full, it just gets replaced, and that becomes trash.
So it goes ejected out into space, effectively.
Yeah, we all the trash removal, including the waste from the toilet, goes in cargo vehicles that come up to resupply the space station. And we take all the good stuff out and we store it on space station, and then we fill them up with trash. At least the ones that blow up. Most of them kind of burn up in. Sorry, they do not blow up. They burn up. They burn up in the atmosphere during re-entry, and so they also serve as waste disposal.
I like it. And there's that amazing bit in the space station. Is it? Am I pronouncing it correctly? Is it the copula where you get this fantastic vision where you can look out? What was it like the first time you looked down from the space station down onto Earth through those windows?
Actually, it was a very special moment. My crewmate had picked it for me. He wanted to make sure that I had this first view is really memorable, and so he basically took me to the cupola just before sunrise. So the first thing I saw from out there was a moment of night, and then the sun coming up at the horizon, and yeah, it's just glorious. It's glorious.
Was it very emotional?
I will just never forget it. And it's symbolic, right? I mean, it was I had just arrived, and this first view from out there from the cupola is the sunrise. So it had a lot of symbolic meaning for me as well. It was like the dawn of this extraterrestrial life for me.
It's a sight that obviously so few of us will ever get to see, and how do you ever, when you come back down to earth, can anything else ever sort of live up to that? Having seen this, having seen these amazing sights and looked down at the earth, it must give you a whole sort of new sort of philosophical perspective on things, does it?
And it's not like, sometimes people kind of ask me whether I feel like, unsatisfied or disappointed with my regular life on Earth after having been in space. And I would not say that that's the case. I mean, there is so much meaning and so much beauty also down here on Earth. That perspective is certainly unique, and I feel very privileged and very happy, and I enjoyed every minute of it. But at the same time, I do think that life on the planet is also full of wonder and full of beauty.
Which is a very good answer, because of course you have got a family down here. You've got your lovely partner who I think we're okay with saying that he also works in the space programs, doesn't he? And you've also got your daughter as well, and Kelsey. Is that correct, Kelsey? Is she? How old is she now?
So our daughter is going to be 5 years old in November.
And I think she knows what you do, doesn't she? And she knows, mummy goes up into space.
Yeah. She probably thinks that it's normal, right?
Standard thing, I mean, obviously you've got the best bragging rights on the school run, I'm sure, with all the other school mums. But is it going to be more difficult on the next mission? You're going to be commander on the next expedition that you go on, which is in 2022. Is it going to be more difficult? Because I saw that you previously said you when you went up and you didn't have children in that family tie, you saw some of your colleagues who did, and you said that they didn't seem quite the same sort of lightness as maybe you had when you were going up. It seemed like they had, an extra worry, basically. Regardless of whether you're a mum or a dad, they had that extra worry. Is that something that concerns you, or is it you're going to do it because it's such a great example to her?
Yeah, no, well, I mean, I obviously I would be lying, and it would be quite obvious that I would be lying if I said it's the same, right? When I flew the first time without children, it was, I didn't have a war in the world. It was all about enjoying the experience, about doing my job. It was obviously, I felt the responsibility of doing my job well, and proving that, all the investment that had been made in my training had been worthwhile. But all of my focus was on the mission. And of course, if you have a family as an astronaut and you're leaving for 6 months, you have to make sure that your family is doing well, that you have if there's things you had to take care of before leaving, that you took care of them, and and that you are from up there, you're still keeping your connection and providing support as much as you can, and not only to your children, but of course also to your spouse, your husband or wife, or the other parent who are going to provide the day-by-day support to their children, but they also need to feel supported, at least emotionally.
She already has said she wants to follow in your footsteps, though, hasn't she? So which is a fantastic example, and something of what the space station is all about. Inspiring people, bringing different countries and different nations together. I think this is one of the points that they make in the Wonderful, in the documentary that you're in, and we're talking about. It's just about how it's this cooperation between all the nations, which is such a wonderful thing when you think about all the divisions down on Earth, that everyone can come together for this amazing project up there. Does that feel kind of like the sort of legacy of the ISS?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the ISS has really shown that we are able, in the space business at least, to really carry out and operate on a daily basis complex projects like this one, and so there is a lot of, and it wasn't a given, and I'm sure 30 years ago nobody knew whether it was going to work out or not, and it has very, very successfully. So it's something that we can then build upon for future and even more ambitious space projects.
And on your next expedition, you hopefully got a spacewalk, haven't you, coming up? Because I know you were disappointed on the last one because they couldn't bring up your suit. And as you mentioned before, you have to have the correct suit. It has to be fitted to you. But there aren't as many smaller suits, which I think it made the news before that there weren't smaller suits so female astronauts could go out and do the spacewalk that they planned. I know you've talked about this issue with sort of gender, and it is one of those jobs where you think, is there a sort of, how is it being a woman going as an astronaut? It seems that I know that you say actually you haven't experienced any kind of discrimination or anything like that, which is fantastic. Do you think there are any differences between being a woman astronaut and being a man astronaut? Is there any advantages in either case, or is it still an ongoing thing, or not really?
Well, first of all, I have to say that the suits are not individually tailored. I mean, nobody has their own suit. I mean, there are different sizes of suit, and they might be adjusted. But what happened to me last time is the undergarment and some personal equipment that you would need for a spacewalk. Not the actual suit.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, in terms of it's very, astronauts are a pretty small group of people. We are not that many, and we are kind of selected with a specific background, with a specific personality type. So we are all very similar, I would say, whether we are men or women.
Yeah.
I think what we have in common, typically, because we are selected like that, right? You're looking for a certain background, you're looking for a certain personality type, a certain experience, certain ambitions. We have a lot in common. We are demographics with many, many things in common across genders, across cultures, across nationalities, and so on. And so that kind of sticks out more, I think, than any gender-specific difference that you might maybe be able to observe if you had like big numbers, right? If you had thousands of astronauts that could start running statistics and see, tend to be a little bit more like that, man like that. But on such small numbers of people selected, in a certain way, it's very hard to see any gender specificities.
I mean, it's been such a big topic across all jobs, and it gets picked out as one of those things. But I mean, there's so many fantastic female astronauts out there, which are great examples. So it's great to hear your perspective on that, and that is not, there isn't anything that you face, because I know you were presented with your own Barbie as well, which have you given it to Kelsey?
He wasn't interested. On the table unpacked.
I love it. Keep it in the box. That's good. I've got so many extra things to ask you, but I am being told that we have to be a little bit quicker. What do you think about the sort of billionaire space race that's happening at the moment? We've had Richard Branson, who's bringing in the commercial space or suborbital flights, and we've got obviously Jeff Bezos with his very uniquely shaped rocket, and you're next going up. You'll be going up on a SpaceX rocket to go up to the space station as a sort of private public partnership, isn't it? So what do you think about these sort of the billionaire space cowboys, basically, who are now all going out into space, the new frontier?
I think that there is a little bit of conflation of different things sometimes in the public discussion. That there's been this summer the suborbital flights of Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin. and those are suborbital flights. So those are opportunities of flying above, depending which one, 80 kilometers or 100 kilometers, and experience a few moments of weightlessness, and then basically coming back to the place one started from. And that is one thing. It's a little bit different from actual space flight in terms of actually getting to orbit. That's a lot more expensive and a lot more complicated. But we're seeing that as well, right? In the we're going to see the first in a couple of days, I believe, the first actual private orbital space flight. So those people are actually going to orbit for a few days. And some people call it the beginning of space tourism, like real space tourism. That is true. What I just want to remind people is that it's extremely expensive. So we are talking about probably
it's not going to beat me on my next holiday thing. Just to finish, because we've got to go. Unfortunately, I've been told by on the side here. So just a very quick one. We've got a couple of questions from a couple of very young readers who want to know. We've got one from Rufus, age 10, who says, "What do aliens look like?" Which I believe you probably didn't see any, but do you believe in them out there?
Again, I mean, one needs to clarify what we're talking about. I mean, there might be life out there in the universe, and who knows, maybe also intelligent life. I believe it's quite unlikely that they are hanging out, around Earth at this time, or around the space station. But somewhere in the universe, there might be intelligence life. Yes.
Wait. What meal did you miss most being up on the space station?
I'd say fresh food. When I came back, the one thing that I really wanted was like a big salad with, fresh tomatoes. I'm Italian, so I wanted my fresh tomatoes, fresh mozzarella, olive oil, tuna, walnuts, and a lot of fresh stuff.
And lastly, from John in Somerset, Star Trek or Star Wars?
Star Trek.
I know, we saw you doing this. So, and with that, we have to say it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you. I have not even touched on my questions, so I'd love to thank you so much for your time. Really pleasure. And if everybody out there, watch The Wonderful, we can learn so much more about life on the space station and how it all came to be from the people from way back when. And you're telling your experiences. It's a fantastic film, so it's well worth having a look, and it's available on digital download as of now. So thank you again for joining me, and fantastic good wishes for next year on the next expedition, where you'll be commander of the ISS.
Thank you so much, Jess, and thank you to the audience.